Okay, so I'm going to be talking about arboreal, also known as tree down flight evolution. So this theory kind of begins with small wing-assisted arboreal climbing protobirds, as they were called. These protobirds had scales underneath their front limbs, kind of very similar to like flying squirrels, how they have that flap of skin under there. This allowed them to parachute down from the tops of trees or high-end trees down to lower points. So again, very similar to how flying squirrels do. These scales then developed into rudimentary feathers, which allowed them to actually glide as well as parachute. And finally, they began to kind of flap their wings and produce lift, which is how modern birds actually fly. So there's kind of variation in how exactly this developed, but kind of the central consensus of this theory is that these animals used gravity as a driving force for their flight development. I like to kind of compare this to like how baby birds learn how to fly. They fall out of the trees and use the lift from falling to develop. Um, so that information is from the first paper that we read, the Earth to Life paper. In further works, however, Chatterjee and Templin actually assessed discrete skeletal structures throughout fossil bodies and found that non-avian theropods had little to no similarity to modern arboreal species. So these protobirds that we're talking about didn't actually have like the skeletal structure to be arboreal necessarily. Um, They also performed cluster analyses, which grouped non-avian theropods and Archaeopteryx with more terrestrial taxa. So this indicates that they were not really adept for living in the trees. They were more ground dwellers, but they could live in the trees. Many supporters of the arboreal theory kind of base their support on the fact that Archaeopteryx was found to have a fully reversed hallux. However, that was found to be false, that Archaeopteryx didn't actually have a reversed hallux. Um, but they do have other characteristics, suggesting that it was a perching animal, but not necessarily an arboreal, really good climber. Um, the fact that they are perching but don't have a fully reversed hallux doesn't necessarily mean that they weren't tree species. It just means that they weren't necessarily strong down climbers. They could still get up in the trees, they just don't have that reversed hallux to come down really easily. But this really just kind of further supports the theory of arboreal flight in that they can get up the trees well, but they can't climb down, so they would have to either float or glide or parachute down. Personally, I kind of think that this theory is the best of the three that were presented to us, given that the central idea is the use of gravity as the driving factor for it. Um, Primarily because we have a lot of modern species, such as flying squirrels, mostly flightless, heavier birds, and baby birds, that they all use the gravity to come down out of trees to actually sort of fly. Or in baby birds' cases, that's how they learn to fly. So I personally think that the arboreal makes the most sense.